What's going on, guys? Zach from Overland Zam, and today we're going to be installing some rock lights from LEDUR on our 2018 to 2024 now Jeep Wrangler. Would want rock lights. One, the cool factor, right? We go up to the meetups, people have rock lights, it looks sick. For my purposes, I'm going to be installing them for the functionality. I do a lot of off-roading, and whenever I'm out on the trail, I am very hesitant to go out at night or to be around in like that dawn dusk time because I can't see what's underneath me. Let's take a look at what's in the box as well as what kind of tools you'll need for the install. This right here is your wiring harness. The wiring harness is hooked up to a relay as well as a fuse, and then it also has your rocker switch, if you will, as well as these two extension cords. Here you can see one of the pod lights. It is in a die-cast aluminum shell. It looks pretty good, very heavy duty. The wire comes out to this plug here, and that plugs into your wiring harness. Now, they do include these rubber anti-shock mounts, so it'll prevent damage to the light and damage to your Jeep. Depending on your mounting needs, the rubber piece that is included has two different mounting points or mounting routes that you can use. Included in the kit is also the aluminum screws that you'll need an Allen wrench for, and their nuts. Just insert the screw into the hole, and then the rubber piece has a little film that it has to go through, so it might be a little awkward when you do it. And then you screw the nut on. Tools you'll need to install the lights the way that I do are two small screwdrivers, preferably Phillips head, one nut driver for the self-tapping screws, a pack of the self-tapping screws, a drill with a 7/16 drill bit, a pair of strippers/crimpers, needle nose pliers that can cut, clear silicone, heat shrink, electrical connectors. We'll use the butt connector and a lug connector, as well as large and small zip ties, and a creeper and a stool. A tip is to connect and test your lights before you install them. This way you know that they all work before they're already installed. To test them, I'm connecting the loose wire to the negative and positive terminals on the battery. Use caution when doing this, as me or LEDUR is not responsible for any injuries that may occur. These are the OEM switches from Jeep. If you don't have these, then what you're going to want to do is either order a set of aux switches and install that, or you can connect directly to your battery terminals. You can see number 3 coming out. It's already been stripped from my last project, so I already have it exposed. You're going to want to find your hot wire, because this is going to provide the current from your aux switch to your lights. And then we're going to get a butt connector. So let's get a butt connector. So before you start, you want to get some heat shrink and put through. That's going to help watertight, waterproof, water resist your electrical line. Strip your wire to where you have about this much of exposed wire. You want to go ahead and twist all of those frayed end pieces so that way they fit into your butt connector easily. Now, we already have the other one hooked up to the aux switch, so the steps are the same though. You insert the wire, make sure that it's nice and snug in there. You want that piece to be inside the butt connector, so if you need to keep twisting it until it's nice, straight point, put it in there. And then you want to get your crimper tool, crimp it down, and then tug it to make sure that it's nice and set. So now that you have your butt connector connected, both connections are tight, take your heat shrink, slip it right over top of it, and you'll get a heat source, and we'll shrink that up. So with your ground wire, we already stripped it. You want to get a lug connector. Has this little circle here for your ground, so that way you can find a spot in the Jeep to to ground your wire. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to line up our hole, get it in there, make sure it's not too far. And you want to see a little bit of the wire exposed there so you know it's through. You don't want to see any wire exposed in the back. Okay, get our crimping tool. We're going to go a size up to crimp. And now we're pulling on it, good amount of force, and it's staying in. We forgot to put our heat shrink on. Luckily, with this type of heat shrink, you do have to maneuver it, but you can maneuver it over top of your connecting piece, work it down, and over. So now that you have your wires connected, before we start going into where you put your wiring harness, we're gonna go ahead and heat shrink our heat shrinks. The safest way to do it is having a heat gun, but we don't have a heat gun. We have a lighter though. So now that your heat shrink's on there, pretty good. You can put some electrical tape on and around it. I don't have any right now, but that's what you would do. You would just wrap it up through there. You put your nut on in there, crank it down, get it nice and hand tight. And you can get a wrench if you want to. I've done this before, just nice and hand tight, and it worked out for me, so that's what I'm gonna do. You can test to make sure that your connections are good, because you don't want to continue to do all this and your connections are bad. But we'll test the connections to make sure that the light on our switch comes on. If the light from our switch comes on, then we know that we're getting power. Now that we know we have power, we can go ahead and figure out where we're going to put our lights and how we want to run them under our Jeep. So the first thing that I did is I looked in here and I found an opening. You can't see it in here, but there was an opening right down underneath here into the fender well. So you want to find that spot, find a way that you can get your line down here, and I'll show you where to hook up your remaining wiring harness. All right, so going into the inner fender here, we've already mapped out the front light, as you can see. You can mount it directly underneath here, but we feel as if you're going to get into the light housing that way. So I don't want to do that. I feel like that would void the warranty if anything were to happen. But right here, all of this is hollow. So you can drive in there. I'm not showing this one because the process over here is exactly the same. You just have to get the location right. So for reference, where your shock is, we think that going right above it and over, somewhere over in here, is going to be your best option for the light. Now with that said, you're going to take your light, and you can at nighttime go ahead and shine your light where you think it would be best suited. However, we've already done that. We feel like the light coming right about here is going to be the best spot for this light. Just like the other light, it's going to be the best spot for it. So while you're holding it there, you want to get your screwdriver and mark out where you think you want your light to go. So for us, we're going to push in, get past the fender well, and right about there is where we want it to be. So then the reason why you want two is because you want to make sure that the holes are lined up and evenly spaced. And so if you take this off and try that, it's going to screw yourself up. So keep that there, and you want to make sure that everything's nice and straight, and then you want to poke in to your fender. So now that you have your holes poked, you know where you want to drill, where you want to go. You're going to take both of the screwdrivers out. And take your light out. So now that you know where you're going to have your holes, you want to go ahead and pre-drill your screw into the light. And you want to make sure that they're as straight as you can get them, because that's just going to help with the install. So you take your nut driver, and you can do it with a screw gun, but I feel like you're gonna get your most accurate drive in, especially being straight in, being mindful of your finger on the outside of it. You see it poke out, you just want to be 2 or 3 threads in the back, like so, and then we're going to just plop it in there. All right, so now that we have our light, we can go ahead and put our silicone at the base here. You don't need a whole lot, but just enough. So then line up your holes again, push in, get your nut driver, and screw it in. You have this light done. So for this line, instead of having to drill in, so here's our light, we went up in here, and what you want to do is angle it up out of the way. You might have to pull the inner fender liner in, but you're going to feed it up through here, and then after a couple attempts it should feed out right here. So that's where our cable is for this one. All right, so before we move on, I want to show you what I did with the wiring harness. As mentioned before, we dropped our line down through here from the top from the battery, and it'll feed out down well enough down here. So 2 things you got to worry about. 1, you got to make sure that everything's up and out of the way, which we will, but 2, you have to cross over the wires to the other side, to the passenger side. So in order to do that, this is what we did. The metal cloak, undercloak system. So my undercarriage is going to look different than your undercarriage. That's okay, because the mounting point is still going to be the same. Turns out that the undercloak system doesn't really hinder. Besides, what I would have done is gone up through here, through this cross member, or through the center cross member, but the skid plate system prevents me from doing that. So instead, on the front cross member, there's this piece here that you zip tie the wiring harness, the little octopus part of the wiring harness. You can zip tie there. So we did. You just have to feed the zip tie up and around and back, and this kind of puts it out of the way. And then you take 6 cords, 6 on each side, okay, and you line them up. And what I did is I zip tied them every so often. So I zip tied the cords themselves, free-flowing cords, then I secured them here with a zip tie, and I made it loose until I liked it how I wanted it. So I tightened it right now, just now. So I went over the cross member, but under the skid plate. So when I tighten up the skid plate again, boom, I'm good. There's a little lip that these can sit in between, and it's not going to get damaged, not going to get cut from anything. But you can see every few inches or so, I zip tied them so that way they're nice and taut. Then if you go to the other side, where I was talking to you about all of our cables here, and then you can run it along, make sure that you're keeping it nice and tight, and then when you get over here, you zip tie it back to the frame again, and then all of your cables are free, so you can run them out the opposite side. So this will keep them tucked out of the way. It's nice and taut, nice and tight, and then you're able to freely move your cables into placement where you want them. All right, so now what we're going to do is find a spot to run our wires. You do have to poke a hole and drill. So we have a 7/16 drill bit. You could probably go a size small, but this connector right here is a little bit big. So you have to be able to drill enough so that way this will go into it. So 7/16 seems to do the trick. What we're gonna do is you're gonna find a spot right behind our light in the fender, and we're just gonna poke a hole in there. Yep. And we're gonna take our drill with our 7/16 drill bit, drill in right there. So when you're drilling, you got to drill through that material too that's behind the fender. There we go. That's through the material. All right, so now we're through the material and the fender well. This will pop in and feed down. You should be able to find it behind here, and then just keep on feeding until finally you fed it down over here. So with your backlight, you want to go ahead and kind of find the center point to your wheel about here, eyeball that up, and then go back. When you go back, that center point is where you want to mount this light. This will shine the wheel well. And to reiterate on your light, you want your screws in, through, a couple of threads in the back. Make sure that your cord is going to go toward the Jeep like this. And you want to put that silicone on here on both sides. So we're going to put a little of the all the way around. Put it back in the holes that we did. So we have our holes that we're going to put this back into with the silicone on it. Just pop them in there. Then I'm going to drill out and then feed my wire through. Feed it toward the back. That's what I did. Gravity will drop it down. We'll find our out. So if you're like me, you had to get underneath your Jeep where your fender liner is. It's kind of hard to see, but here's the fender liner here. And I was able to wiggle, and there is our cable right here. You're going to want to put it in this configuration here. And what I did is put a zip tie through this end, so inside this end with the zip tie facing outward. And then you feed it all the way through and then come in with your working end. So this part of the zip tie will go through the back up to the front. So that way, whenever you're wanting to mount it here, you can wrap this portion of the zip tie around, which we will do in a minute, and then through here. So then it'll secure and you can tighten it up like that. So that's 3 times for each side. So you want to have 6 lights that are in this configuration. So this one we already did. We took the back of our rock guard. This is the very end piece that connects the body to the rock guard. And we went ahead and zip tied it, and I'll show you how to do it, but I wanted to show you where my point was, because then we have to come over here. So this is the end one. We're going to go over to our other point. This is the middle one. We're just going to come over here. So these 2 holes are going to be our working holes. And then the last one for the side mounts, we're going to follow it up front. This is forward. This is your first mount for your rock slider. And we're going to mount it here in these holes. So I'll show you what that looks like. So what you want to do is take your light. Again, make sure line up this piece, your line, to your Jeep. And take your zip tie, feed it up. It helps if you bend it toward the light. You're going to put a crease in there. And then another crease. That'll help us get it up and over. So we're going to go up and over until you can see it feed out the other side. And once it does, adjust your positioning. Stick that in there and then tighten. We're going to keep tightening it as tight as we can. And you can see that's on there really good. So then you take that cable that you ran specifically for this light, find your arrows, put them together, and make sure that you tighten this up good, and you can run your wire. So this is the front one now. Do the same thing. Put a crease. So you want to get either a wire snake, or in our case, we're just using a clothes, like a wire clothes hanger. Straighten it out, make it an end, like a little hook on the end. There we go. So this will be on the outside where it feeds through. You're going to take this, feed it through there, through the same hole that it came out of. You're going to take your hook, you're going to go up through this hole until you can see it out in the other hole. See how you can see it in the other hole? So then you want to take your hook and attach your wire to it like that. Bring it over and around, line it up, and get it outside this hole. Once you do that, you can unhook it, get rid of your hook, and you can feed your cable where it needs to go. All right, so I'm gonna do my best to explain what I did. I kind of showed you what I was doing. I ended up coiling the two front lights. So drilled in, that's the rear, and over there is the front. So I put the front cable over the shock mount, wrapped it through here. You'll see this tubing here. This is your electrical tubing that feeds down under the Jeep. So I ended up just zip tying it to there, coiled it where I could, and I kept the zip tie so you could see where I zip tied it. And I ran it through here, so up and over. When I went up and over, so this is your front control arm. Over top of it, you can see where it'll feed through. So I fed that through, followed those cables, and zip tied along those cables. So this is where I ended up putting all the excess. Our receiver that I showed you before is in here. This is where we connected to cross over. And then this is where we put all of our extra line. There was a hole here that I fed the cable through. So I fed that through here where I showed you how to snake it. So then one line is up here, then snaked these lines and fed it up and zip tied it to these holes. Then I kept going instead of feeding it over and over, which I guess I could have done, but I didn't. Here's the other light. Then we fed over top here. We didn't have anything that I can zip tie it to. So those are free flowing all the way around until you get here. So then when you get here over top of your frame, you'll feel the cable. So the cable, that is your Jeep's electrical cable. So I just zip tied the lines pretty secure and snug as I could. Just re-snugging it some. Up, so here's your third light. Okay, So everything's nice and snug. And then that final light goes up through the fender, down over here. So I zip tied it again. This is the electrical to the Jeep. Zip tied it here, and I zip tied it up top so that way it wouldn't fall. And so that's how I ran my cables all the way down.
I found this on the web.
And so all you have to do is repeat the process for the other side, and you should be good.